Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. It's May the 19th, 2025, and this is the final regular online meeting of the West Shore Photography Club for the 2024-25 club year. Our next online meeting will be in September the 8th. We'll kick off the new club year. So no regular online meetings during the summer, but trips will continue. And to tell you about our upcoming trips, I'll turn the meeting over to Jean.
Hi, everyone. We have a bunch of trips planned for the summer, well, right up until December, actually. But in June, we have three trips. On the 7th, we're going to Wildwood in Harrisburg, and Elaine and Ron are going to teach us about the flowers and the birds, and that is going to be fun. Then Dennis and Mark on the 14th are going to take us to Pine Grove Furnace. And then on the 21st, I'm going to be helping out with the Steelton Skate Park. And there will be an event going on that day, so we should get lots of action. I'm really excited about that. In July, I'm so excited for it, Christmas in July at the National Christmas Museum down in Elizabethtown. And also we'll be going to Fort Hunter. And I guess before we had gone to Fort Hunter in the morning, this time we're going to go in the evening so that we get different lighting situations. So that should be fun. And let's see, August we'll be doing the Capitol fountains, and also we're going to do Dickinson photo walk. uh I haven't decided if we're going to do a one lens challenge there or not. If anybody went to the Boiling Springs photo walk on Saturday, we had a 50 millimeter challenge, and I don't know, I that's what I typically use when I do go on a photo walk. So I was kind of used to it, but I know a couple other people weren't used to the 50 millimeter. So I've been seeing the pictures come up and everybody's things look so pretty. So I'm going to stop there because we have so much more. But Dennis will have the whole rundown on the replay for tomorrow. So
Indeed.
I'll
Yep.
turn it back over to you, Dennis.
Okay. Thanks, Jean. Well, we're very
Sure.
pleased tonight. Yep. Very
Hey,
pleased to
Dennis.
have, I'm sorry.
Dennis, this is Mark Albano. Before we go any further, I'd like to make a plea, for lack of a better term. We're not getting a lot of pictures on Snapchat for the Basilica.
Oh, Smug Mug.
And sorry, Smug Mug. So if anybody's got pictures they'd like to upload there, please do. Those people were very excited about us visiting. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks. Yep. And the same would go, of course, for the trip on Saturday to Boiling Springs. For those who went, I think there were 11 of us there. Please upload your pictures to the Smug Mug account. The link was included in the trip announcement.
Yep.
Yeah, as they always are. Okay, very good. We are very pleased to have tonight George Kurzik, a member of the club, of course, has agreed to do a presentation on long exposure HDR photography. And I'm excited. I know Joe's excited to get into this. I've seen George's photos on Facebook for quite a while and have been very impressed. So he's going to explain how he creates those. So, George, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I ask that you tell people a little bit about yourself because probably not many members of the club know you. So it's all
Oh,
yours, George.
well, thank you, Dennis. Yeah, that's just me. I like to stay anonymous sometimes. uh, um, I um, I am now retired, and I live here in Pelham, Pennsylvania, down not far from York. Many moons ago, about 50 years ago, I actually went to school to become a school trained photographer. I went to RIT and I majored in professional photography for 2 semesters, and then realized that was a road to poverty, and changed majors, got rid of all the gear, lived my life with point and shoots until about 10, 12 years ago. I was, my wife and I were living in Australia for my work assignment. And one day I was trapped on a outback road with a whole flock of sheep all around me in my car. And I stepped out to get pictures with my little point and shoot, and because I thought it was great. And they're right in the middle of it. I go, man, I'm better than this little piece of junk. And I went through 5 cameras in 2-3 years because my skill set just took off like a rocket again. So that's kind of my saga. But I've been retired 5 years now, and I'm a terrible driver because I never look at the road. I'm always looking at the landscape for more pictures. So, well, with that, I'll get right into it. I love all the genres, like all of us, I'm sure. I love macro, I love nature, bird photography, but the thing that really excites me is doing long exposure work. And what I mean by long exposure, it means typically anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute and a half, combining it with HDR, because I use bracketing to actually lengthen my exposure times. So the picture here you see is one I took when I was working in Philadelphia. I crossed over one evening during a stormy day over to Camden, New Jersey, and basically put on my mud shoes and kind of crawl down to the edge there and to shoot. What you're seeing there first is mud flats, actually, that looks like water, but it's actually a reflection off the mud. And just captured it quite nicely, the Ben Franklin Bridge. Anyway, let's get into this here. Page down. And my computer is not doing anything. This is good. There we go. Agenda today, I'm going to do the introduction like we just went over. I'm going to talk about the components of long exposure photography. I've got about 15 or so images that we're going to look at, and talk a little bit about each one and what I did to it, tools and techniques, and I have processing in here, but I'm not going to get into that too much. Mostly my favorite packages are Photomatics for HDR, and I'm a bit of an outlier in that I use Corel Paint Shop Pro. Probably in my introduction, I should have said that I was a Paint Shop Pro ambassador, professional, and a lot of my images ended up on their website and in their on their boxes. And I would give webinars pretty much like I'm doing today, basically to hawk the product. I still use it. There's so many good packages out there, like we've already heard. So, but I'll talk a little bit about it at the end. All right, long exposure photography. It as probably goes without explaining, but there's the textbook definition. It's a technique involving capture single image over extended periods of time. What I like about it, and it's there in the text, I try and find both motion and still things to shoot, because the motion in the background just accentuates your subject. That's something I'm always looking for, especially at sunsets like this picture. So you can render some beautiful, striking images by using long exposure work. Here's some of the techniques I use. Multiple components. Of course, this presentation, I tried to shoot for the middle as far as the understanding of many of the members. I didn't want to make it too technical. So some of it may sound a little basic, but the first thing you have to understand is the trade between shutter speed and aperture. Most of my work when I'm shooting, I shoot in the lowest ISO. I shoot at f/22. I put a 10 stop ND filter on, trying to get as much time as I can for the bracketing that I'm shooting. And that brings us to point 2, where I'm always shooting, between 5 and 9 exposures starting at around 10, 15 seconds. And then for the bracketing, it never goes past 30 seconds. But, I'll end up with about a minute and a half to 2 minutes of exposures that I will fold together to create one exposure, one finished image. So long exposures, bracketing, very low ISO. Again, just to get as little light as I can. And then, I'm sorry. Then I'll use the high dynamic range processing. And of course, the most important thing for all of us is, what's your vision? What are you trying to shoot? What are you trying to say? What do you want your, what artwork are you trying to create? And that's why, again, while I'm driving, I'm always looking. I'm looking for that perspective and that angle and that scene that lends itself to something I want to create. By the way, if anybody has any questions, Dennis, I don't know how you want to handle that. I can easily take them as we go. That might be best. And then I can answer them when we're at any particular slide. So I'll welcome them.
George, I do have a question if I can. On the first image, the image you had prior to this, have a question on that. When you're taking a shot like this, where you're going for, let's say, a minute, and you have a tree that has some breeze in it, how do you handle that? Do you let it go blurry, or do you try and capture one sharp image of the tree and then blend it in?
I've done both, actually. Well, first rule I always try to follow is I go on a still day just to avoid
Okay.
that. But I will clip one shot at 125th or 250th second before I start the long exposures, because the Photomatics offers or has in their package where you can deghost the image.
Okay.
So what it is, it'll pick the sharpest one, but it'll still give you the HDR effect by folding all the images together, and it'll eliminate the blur part. So it's really a handy feature. I've done that. In fact, we'll get to a couple I can talk specifically to that.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. I'm going to cover the equipment, the compositional tips, your camera settings, HDR processing. It says PaintShop Pro, but I just use Photomatics and the final editing. I'm not going to get into that because all the packages are all the same as far as I'm concerned. Contrast, fill light, all the features that kind of make the picture snap, all the layers, all the separation, whatever. We can talk to that, but I'm just repeating what other presenters can do much better than I can. So let's continue here. As far as equipment, any camera will work, just so long you can set it, for a longer exposure time, and you can basically manually take the camera, because that's one thing with these kind of photographs, you have to have manual control. You can't let the camera do the thinking for you. But mirrorless DSLRs, I don't know if you can do it with an iPhone or not, but I'm sure there's capability there. So the most essential thing that I use is the tripod. When I'm making multiple exposures like I do, and the shots we'll see in the future, most of them I've shot with a starting exposure of 15 seconds, and then I let the camera bracket to 15, 10, 8, 20, and 30 seconds. So it gives me a combined exposure of a minute and a half. I know that's probably a little hard to get your head wrapped around it, but when I fold the image together, it basically gives me a minute and a half exposure in 5 separate images, or 9 separate images, whatever the case may be. But for that, you have to have a tripod, not just a light tripod, but something that's sturdy, strong, because sometimes when you do shoot in the wind, any kind of vibration will ruin the exposure. I try to avoid the blur that comes from the vibrations. I know I've had some of the trouble I've had with some exposures is when I'm on a bridge. When I was in Philadelphia shooting the skyline, the trucks would create enough rubble when crossing the bridge that I'd get slightly blurry images. So I always had to wait for the right light and for a traffic light so I could start shooting. So anyway, but tripod, most important. Remote shutter release. Second thing, you don't want to be touching your camera after you get started with the exposures. One trick I use the self timer function on my camera, and it's set to take 5 or 9 bracketed images, basically what I dial in. And I just press the shutter, it waits 2 seconds, and it starts clipping off the brackets for me. So, but if you don't have that feature, then you've got to use a remote shutter release. And the thing you want to avoid is, taking a picture and then touching your camera again to set to a longer exposure time. That should all be programmed in when you set your bracketing on your camera. I have it such that the camera takes over for the exposure settings, so I don't have to worry about it. I touch my camera once and it does the job. ND filters, as I mentioned, I have 2 ND filters. I use a 10 stop and a 6 stop, and I don't use a 6 stop too often. I use that maybe at dusk, just if I need a little more exposure than I want to try and get. But most of the times I use 10 stops to get me to again to that 15 to 30-second range exposure. And I think it was Joe, you might have got me turned on to that. Those case filters. I love those. Oh my gosh. Because again, most of my work, as we get into the pictures, I use very wide angles, and it's a blessing not to have to thread them on and off. Although that's the way I've done most of my work already, was threading on the ND filters after I pre-focused. And I'll get into that when we get into technique. Setting your cameras. Absolutely manual mode. You want to get out of automatic. That means you're going to manually set your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. And again, I like to go to the lowest ISO possible. We want to get out of autofocusing. I know a lot of cameras when they ship, they at least with the Nikons, they're already set up to focus when you press your shutter release. Well, first thing I always go is set mine to go back button focusing, and you only focus once for these long exposures. It's again to avoid any tampering after you get set up. The thing with this work, it's always set pieces. So all the compositional work on the tripod, all the setting of the camera, it takes a couple minutes to get everything ready, and then that's when you go to work. But again, I always make sure I'm on manual focus. If you're threading on your ND filters onto your lens, you generally have to pre-focus first, because the focus, when you back button focus, will not see through the ND filter. Now, the mirrorless camera I have a Nikon Z8, sees right through it and will autofocus through the 10x filter. It'll be slower, but it does the job. Again, find your ISO setting. I go down to almost 0. I wish it could even go lower. But I think the relative ISO at the ISO, I think it's 1.0 levels and ISO 25, like the old Kodachrome. So, but I get as low as possible, and especially because for 2 reasons. I get the longer exposure, and the second, when you're using like an HDR processing software, if you're going anywhere above ISO 100, the software does tend to introduce noise, when you're combining a number of images. So that's why it's best to shoot as low as you can. set it for bracketing. That's what I do. Now this shows there's a button on almost all the cameras that will give you a bracket function. I use a minimum of 5, sometimes 7. For sunsets where you're going to have a blowout sky and a deep, dark foreground, I always go 9 exposures. And I shoot a little bit to the right on the histogram to get that darker image, the darker feature of the image to at least show up on one of the exposures. The HDR software will bring it out. So set it for bracketing again. Excuse me. Want to try and I try and do an overall metering of the scene, and I'll typically set it right in the middle, knowing that the bracketing will do the overexposing and underexposing for me.
George, can I ask a question here?
Of course.
Why do you bracket every shot or just some shots that you deem that it might be necessary?
All shots. I bracket everything. I've
Okay.
always bracketed only because the Photomatic software likes bracketing. It likes to have a number of, the more exposures you give it, you have more options when you're processing too. Or sometimes when I bracket, I may not like the first 1 or 2 that are either underexposed or overexposed, and I can always eliminate them, not use them later, but at least I have them there on the card.
Okay.
I've almost never, the only time I ever do single exposures is when I'm shooting birds or macros or, moving subjects, live subjects. But anything that's I shoot on a set piece, I'll always bracket.
Okay.
Do you
One of
do
my
one,
habits.
1 or 2 stops a difference in exposure?
Half stops.
Oh, half
Half
stops.
half stops. Yeah. If I shoot 9, depending on how severe the contrast is between the shadows and the highlights, typically a 9 exposure, gives you almost 4.5 stops from top to bottom, and that's plenty typically. In a real severe situation, I'll go to full stop, 9 stops, but I've always found that's too much. When I watch the histogram on the back of the camera, just so long I peek out a little bit on the overexposed and go under a little bit on the other side, or I don't have to go totally underexposed, but just to almost touch that right side of the shoulder. I'll show you here to the histograms. You want your high end of the bracket to just be touching almost. Low end, it doesn't have to be at the bottom, but it doesn't hurt either. I try and I'm trying to move here the picture. Typically you don't care what the shape of the curve is, but you want to try and stay off the shoulders if you can. Try not crash into both walls on the left and right. We've had lectures on this before, but I live off my histograms when I'm bracketing, so I know what I'm getting. And the rule has always been I always try and shoot a little bit to the right. It's better to get a little more highlight in there than too deep a shadow.
Are you shooting raw files?
Oh boy, I was afraid somebody would ask that question. I shoot only JPEGs.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, talk about that.
I just found it was easier, faster, less hard drive space. My life became simpler when I just stuck with JPEGs. I have no problem getting the effects I want, getting the images to look the way I want them using JPEGs.
Interesting.
And that's almost an apostasy. I realize that, but I'm a simple guy, and I found trying to work with RAWs is just a little too much for me.
Well, then that explains why you're shooting in half stop increments.
Oh, there you go.
Most of the guys, if they're shooting raw, the decision is, do I shoot in 1 stop or 2 stop increments?
Yeah. Well, there
Interesting.
you go. I would have never thought that. No, I've just preferred the simplicity of JPEGs. Now I'll
Okay.
shoot as high resolution as I can, but I've had no problem. And you'll see that when we go to the review images.
George, do
Any-
you ever see a problem of having too many bracketed exposures?
I haven't run into that yet.
Okay.
I haven't run, you know, at the outside, I might have 9 exposures. And it's not, if I'm, matter of fact, when I do some of my intentional camera movement and some of my impressionism work, I'll go up to 20, 25 exposures to try and move the camera between a few of them to create an effect that I'm after. I didn't put any of those images in this presentation, but I've done a great deal of impressionism and ICM doing that same thing by shooting way too many, and it becomes crazy. But I have done that.
That sounds like a future presentation, George.
Well, if you can, I guess if you get behind me and twist that arm hard enough, we'll talk about it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, let's go over a few of my images. Probably I'll try and not dwell on them too long. I do them for inspiration for the club and explain some things maybe I may have done for these. So let's go over some of these. But anyway, the compositional tips, you know, rule of thirds never hurts anybody's feelings. You know, I never center any subjects. And leading lines is always a nice thing to have, to try and force the eye to that main subject. I always shoot at 14 millimeter, almost always as strong a wide angle as I can, because I love the perspective it gives. Because I can both get the sky and I get some anchoring with my baseline, with my images in the foreground. And of course, looking for texture wherever I can between sky and subject. And of course, the weather is a big one. What are the clouds doing? If you have, like today was a good example, you have bright clouds and clear skies. That's not really good for HDR or for, excuse me, for long exposure, because they look kind of, they don't blend well when you're shooting. They create a lot of contrast. I'll have a couple of images to show you that when I've shot in bright cloud days. I try to go for more subtle weather, not totally overcast, but then you get no texture in the sky. But I'm always looking for texture to create an effect in your skies. Now, of course, here this shot we're looking at is the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Had some nice wispy clouds going on, and of course this is at least a minute and a half combined of the 5 bracketed images I had for a blue hour shot, and it worked well, you know, using my HDR. But let's go to the next one here. This is a broad daylight shot. I took that in Hilton Head. I was looking for dune shots. You know, I was after the texture, but the clouds were moving in such a way that kind of complemented the angle of the dunes that I was shooting. And I was able to create this effect. Again, you can see where the clouds were broken. You see white and dark, white and dark. So that kind of worked with this one. It was enough overcast and diffuse lighting where I could create this effect of really, I think a very ethereal beach scene, if you will. Okay. Any questions on this image? And if not, I keep going here.
Well, just an observation. The clouds actually show more blurring than I would expect from the length of the exposures that you're using.
Well, it gets back to watching the weather, because sometimes you get out and the clouds aren't moving at all. And on other days, they're running across the sky, which is perfect shooting. And that's what this was doing. They were moving pretty quick.
Okay. So the effect of the clouds would actually be a result of the total exposure time you were talking about of all the bracketed shots?
Yep, exactly. And here's a church I found in near Watsontown in northern Pennsylvania. I was up there for a funeral about 2 months ago, and I just spotted this little church out in the middle of nowhere. And again, the nice guys who are working. I try and get a strong perspective between the little cemetery and of course the roof of the church, and the clouds just formed a nice background for it. So very strong image.
George, on this shot here and the other two shots you've shown, the direction of the clouds was very important in the shot. Can you speak a little bit about that?
It's always nice if you can shoot into the direction of the clouds approaching you or going away from you. It doesn't matter, because the long exposure will make it look the same either way. Sometimes when they go across the sky in a horizontal motion across your frame, you don't get much effect. Or again, on a very overcast day when there's no texture or contrast, you almost get nothing. But I like to have them in such a way that they're approaching me. Like this one. This one, they're actually moving away from me. So you get that, it looks like a burst of sky almost.
Yeah, I love that.
There's one. There's a good example. That's the Horn Farm Agricultural Center, Agricultural Education Center. Oh, just 2 miles from my house. It's a place where they actually train organic farmers. Now this building is now being reconstructed. It got struck by lightning 2 years ago and it burnt. But they're restoring it now. But this was at sunset. You'll see the sun right off here to the left. I actually tried to get that out of the picture, but the clouds were just traveling perfectly with the blue sky. And again, this is a 5 exposure HDR image.
That backlit greenhouse just glows.
Oh, I know, it just jumps out. I was thinking about cloning that out at one point, but I kind of I kind of liked it. So
George, this is Joan Smith. I have a question. Are you doing any color enhancement on these this particular shot in post?
I probably cranked. Yes, I did. I cranked up the U a little bit for the afternoon light, and I do play with the post lot after I do the HDR, because Photomatics gives you a number of options, and it gives you internal enhancements, which actually makes it snap when you do the high def. But then I'll do post after that in my editing in Corel, just to bring out a little bit of the contrast, kind of make the colors snap a little bit, depending on what I'm trying to create. This one, in retrospect, there might be a little too much hue in the grass. I mean, it's not bad, but I might want to tone that down a little bit.
I'm not sure what you mean by you.
HUE, a little too strong on the color. I can
Okay.
dial back the hue. I should say hue.
Hugh,
Yeah.
gotcha on that. I just wondered, because of shooting in JPEG, the camera does so much of the adjustments itself that I thought that whatever you did here was beautiful. And if that was all camera, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's yeah, I just found that I'm probably not trainable sometimes, and for me to work with the raw images, I was struggling a little bit. Now, this is a guy who has no trouble working with an infrared camera and doing color corrections, but for some reason the raws make me nuts.
Whatever works for you. I have tried Photoshop so many times. I'm sure I'm untrainable in Photoshop. So
Oh, well, that makes two of us.
I totally get it.
No, I mean, I've tried Photoshop and I just can't climb that hill. Anyway, here we go. Let's see.
Let me follow up on Joan's comment there. Since you are shooting JPEG, and as she said, the camera does a lot of the processing internally with the algorithms, do you change your camera styles to get different contrast, saturation, and so forth when you're shooting in different situations?
No, I don't. I just leave it on standard I don't, that's just one more variable I don't want to mess with.
Okay.
You know, I think the most of the work I can do is between the HDR software and then the final, the final Corel, just doing the final adjustments. A lot, what most of my work has to be on all these HDRs. This thing I spend most of my time doing is eliminating the dust spots. Because one thing about HDR, you've magnified all those stinking dust spots on your sensor
Mm.
because you've taken 9 exposures of the same spot. And then when you do HDR, you'll see them like crazy. So I spend most of my time just getting rid of dust spots.
Yeah. Could I go back to a second to a comment that Joe made about single versus bracketing? What is the main reason why you bracket instead of just doing single long exposure shots?
What I like about the bracketing is to use in the high def software is that I can bring out the shadows without blowing out the highlights.
Mm.
I've never, you know how it is when you try and do a single exposure, you're never going to be able to get, well, I'll use this picture that we're in an example, without blowing out this part of the sky where the sun is and then get the shadows in, the HDR helps bring that all back together where you get I don't want to say a neutral image, but one where, the highs and the shadows are evened out.
Okay.
George, this is a comment, Joe Farrell. About 15 years ago, when I first started to use Photomatics, and I was following this guy, I think he was from Australia, Trey Radcliffe, and
Oh.
he made his images look so god awful horrible that he had a following of a gazillion people with these horrible shots. Was that just a function of what he was doing, or was that really a early thing that Photomatics had a problem that it cranked out goofy looking images?
I'm kind of glad you brought that out because I didn't put this in the presentation anywhere, but I have seen many HDR. I've gone to a number of HDR sites and a number of groups, and so many of them are awful. They make my eyes pop out of my head because it's overdone. The
Yeah.
bad thing about HDR, and I'll go on the record on this. Too many people overdo it. That to the point where it's, to me, it doesn't look like reality. I mean, this picture here we're looking at is not reality by any means, but it at least a lot of my post editing is to try and dial back some of the effect you get with the HDR to try and avoid it looking like it was a manufactured print.
Okay.
Well, like it's a cartoon.
Like a cartoon, exactly, like it's out of a comic strip. Like here,
Yeah.
this is an abandoned barn. It's, again, not far from my house. I go there a lot. Again, it's sunset, nice sweeping skies, a lot of difficult image things to work with in here because the HDR almost started to blowing out some of the, the highlighted areas in here. I had to dial some of that back, but I was able to get this deep shadow of the barn in. So that kind of worked out okay. Again, this was I probably did this in 5 exposure. I probably should have had done it in 9 to get more of the under the low the shadows without trying to. I had to be careful not to blow out this area just above the barn. That's the problem again when you're dealing with some of these subjects, especially towards dusk. The degree of lighting is so marked that you just have to kind of work with that to avoid trying to keep it not blowing out these highlights because that's always been the tough part.
Yeah.
This I shot not so long ago. I go here all the time. This is just a couple miles from my house. The Veterans Memorial Bridge between Wrightsville and Columbia, and this is shot from the Columbia side. And the sun was just over the bridge effectively, and a nice nice cut. This is not a very long exposure. This is maybe in the 8 to 10 second range. So I still got plenty of texture in the skies. I did shoot some long ones, but I lost some of this, this wisping that really created a very nice effect with this. Now in post-process, what I did was this bridge and the reflection were still a little on the dark side for me. So I ended up doing a little fill lighting here with layers, try and bring that out a little more. So there was some trickery involved.
George, can you sometimes do too long of exposure, and you have to say you want to do like 8 exposures, and then you say, oh crap, I think I better go back to 5 exposures. Do you go through that mental set?
Yes, I do, because sometimes, especially when you get unique lighting, like in the case this picture, if I'm waiting 2.5 minutes, it's like, oh my God, especially when the red sky hits at dusk, which only lasts a minute or two sometimes, I have to watch how many I want to take, especially if I have very changeable sunset conditions. So I try and get a long exposure, but not too long. Like I usually try to stay minute and a half again, and I'll keep shooting. Sometimes I'll have over 100, 150 images because the light kept changing and I had to keep capturing it. So, but yeah, that is a consideration. It's a good question. You can go too long because while you're shooting long exposures, you might be missing something that started on the front end of your bracketing. This is in Philadelphia. This is the Delaware River. I forgot the name of this bridge, but again, nice clouds, nice anchored. I use the dock here, the old dock, and for anchoring the picture. This I'm sure was a 5 exposure shot for Blue Hour. That didn't need, at this time, the only real things you got to worry about blowing out are these reflections. You got to be careful of those from the lights in the bridge.
Were you standing in that muck?
I was standing on something solid, but I always carry my mud shoes with me.
Okay. That's interesting you said that. Can you comment on what you just said about your muck shoes?
I always carry them with me. I always have them in the trunk of my car, along with I have my good set of cameras in the house, and I have my old spare in the trunk of my car as well, in case I don't have my other set with me.
Okay.
This is very interesting because I was traveling from New York to in my career, I was in the defense industry, and I was traveling to Picatinny Arsenal, New Jersey, which is the Army Engineering Center. And I crossed a different way along the Delaware River to head up that part. I don't know if anybody's driven the very western part of New Jersey along the Delaware River, but it is a beautiful drive. It's not like the turnpike. And I found this old rail trestle. And for this shot, I had to wait quite a while because it was a windy day. And when the wind is blowing, you don't get really good reflections on long exposure in water because it gets choppy. And while I was waiting, all of a sudden the wind died, the clouds were moving. And then I immediately took my 5 exposures, and this is what I ended up with after I processed it. Just a nice reflection of the clouds against still water. That's the reason I included it. And this gets back to watching the weather. Because even, as we know from shooting waterfalls and other water features, the long exposure can smooth it out. But for reflections, you still have to have almost no wind. I'll show you
Hey, George,
another.
I'm sorry, I have a question. You're using, correct me, generally f-stops, high f-stops. So that gives you a depth of field that everything is in focus. So the question is, have you done any, or is there a reason that you would not lower the f-stop and have a focal point where the image is not totally in focus towards the in the depth of field.
Well, that's a good question and a challenge, actually. I don't recall doing that, to be honest with you. I'm always going for the max depth of field. And well, even if I lowered the f-stop when I'm shooting 14 millimeter, anything beyond 6 or 8 feet, it's always in focus, even with the small or with the larger f-stops. I did do a couple once, and I don't know if I have them in this presentation. I was shooting sunflowers at sunset, and I know I did use like an f5.6, but the background did blur up a bit, and I'm not sure I like the shot as much with as opposed to a sharper sunset. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I didn't include that in this presentation. But yeah, I've done both, but I still go for the max depth of field.
No, thank you. I understand. And thank you. And your comment about the wide angle 14 millimeter would limit that depth of field.
It definitely does.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
There I happened to be in London for a few days, and a rainstorm came up, and those clouds were moving and shot the old bridge. So, but now here's a good example. See how there's no reflection in that water other than the lights here on the right. It was a very windy and the river was choppy, so you don't get a smooth. Like if this water was very still and flat, you'd get the reflection of the bridge right in it. So whenever I'm shooting water or water features, if I can get a calm day, so much the better. This is another. I love bridges, by the way. I hope you picked up on that. This one, I was in South Korea, and this is in the middle of a snowstorm. A snow squall came up. Because it's long exposure, you don't see it, but you see the river was really moving quick. There's just the reflection of the bridge, but no features of the clouds or anything. But the clouds created a nice effect regardless. So this one, I just like the architecture of the bridge. I thought it was beautiful. And the guy I was traveling with, he had to wait in the car for half an hour while I was futzing around, but oh well, that's what happens when you have a photographer with you.
George, on that one, did you also do your bracketing? Did you do that every time? Is your camera?
Yeah, yes, I did. And that's 5 exposure bracket.
Okay.
Again, that's how you get these lows here in the hills. Was able to get that and not blow out these highlights in the bridge.
Yeah. Very nice.
But it doesn't look like an HDR, does it?
No, not at all. None of them actually do.
That's what I try and achieve, because again, I've seen stuff that visually gagged me. Anyway, here's the George Washington Bridge, shot from the Fort Lee Hill. I was going for the lights on the bridge, and this is 2 levels, multi-level traffic coming across both ways to New York City, and just enough clouds to make a nice, interesting background. This is up in Watsontown, Pennsylvania. It's kind of the sister bridge to the Wrightsville Bridge, built about the same time. Again, very still water. This is a good example of the water almost not moving at all, but the clouds were. And I got this really strong perspective that really just pops into this. The clouds formed a natural vignette around the whole bridge. I just happened to fall out of the car at the right time. I said, oh my God, this is so perfect. I'm going running. I look like a madman with a tripod in one hand, camera in the other, traipsing through these weeds down to the shore and setting up. So that's what I'm always looking for. Okay, speaking of long exposures, doesn't have to be all about the clouds by any means. This is Little Kreitz Creek, a mill fall right near my house here. And what I love, especially after rainstorms, you get foam in the water. You get some of the foam going on, And if you shoot long enough exposures, you get the spirals and the textures and all this motion in the water. I know, you know, some of the lectures we've seen and heard, a lot of, oh, I'm sorry. A lot of the lectures we've heard, a lot of photographers, the magic spot for a lot of waterfalls is around quarter second, half second, you know, to still get the texture of the falls without turning it total milky. But I was after the milky effect on this one. Same here. This is Stickler's Run over in Lancaster County. Just, I love I was watching the water, watching the spirals. So I crawled to this was a difficult spot to get to, but set up the camera and went as long as I could over a number of images, bracketed images to get that effect. Again, Ricketts Glen in the fall. This, you know, is probably 8 to 12 seconds, enough to make it milky. Some photographers don't like that. Others, you know, really like the effect. So, and I'm almost done with the images. This, I was actually invited to come up to one of the towers and shoot this image. I called the people, and when I was working in Philadelphia, and I gave them my sad story, and they said, "Well, why don't you come up? You can come up. We'll before we open up for the special time, and you can bring a tripod and do some shots. So, you know, all we ask is that we can publish them." And they did. They use this in their brochure. That's the observation tower there, the Comcast tower. And again, this is another great reason to use long exposures. You get the lights. I'm always looking for the curves in the roads where I can see taillights and headlights and do this kind of thing. Middle Creek. Not only can you shoot geese up there, but my wife goes to a quilt shop nearby. So I drop her off and I drive the 5 miles and I go looking around the creek, and it was just a gloomy day, but worked out good for the lake. Again, clouds were approaching me. The water was still, and we get that effect. This is a good example of where the water was very choppy. This is up in the Finger Lakes, Skaneateles Lake. Nice clouds, nice sunset, but hardly any reflection off the water because it was choppy. So, but it still turned out to be a pretty nice picture. Again, HDR, but again, I try not to make it look HDR. And I think that's my last image. This is actually a big bright cloud that stood out by itself, but it was moving so fast that I had to drive to a place where I knew there was a tree. I had to find a subject real quick. And so I went there and set it up and let it rip. Now, that's quite an effect that this came out to be. Again, the whites aren't blown out at all. A little bit of the tree's a bit dark, but that doesn't hurt the image at all. Anyway, and is that my last one? And this is just a farmer's field in front of me. That's Flinchboss Market. Just as the peaches are blooming. Happen to have a good sun, and again, went a long exposure to get the effect. So, okay. Let's see here. Let me just go through this whole thing real quick. This is how I shoot them. This was the York County Courthouse, 4, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 10, I guess. And then when I combine it with Photomatics, and Photomatics brings out this depth area. It doesn't look like on these individual image, but it snaps too. And I was able to get these headlights of the cars. I was after that, and I got the sky going on here. Now I put a little color back in the sky, make it a little redder. But that's the York County, the old courthouse here in York, shot from a parking garage. How do I do that shot? You see in this lower image, you see this overhang here. Well, that's where I was. I climbed out on the thing and set up my tripod, and did a belly, a low crawl and set up to shoot this angle.
Wow.
People were wondering what the hell I was doing.
Yeah, I would.
George, it's very interesting because none of the original images look bright enough to
To
give you
create
the-
this, I know. Well, they have a feature in Photomatics that it's called enhanced, and you enhance it, and it gives a shot at the low lights here, at the shadows.
Hmm.
And let's see, same thing here. Well, there's the one we started with, and then there it comes again.
Oh. Yeah, your images are beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I get lucky now and then.
I know, we know better than that.
Hey, well, I think that's pretty much now I did, this was for the benefit of Paint Pro users. I was showing them how to do HDRs, but I don't need to explain that. If anybody who's using HDR, I've been using Photomatics. I think Nick has one, a software package out there. I know there's another HDR package that somebody else offers, but I've had good luck with Photomatics. So I'm not going to get into how to generate an HDR. That's all self-explanatory. But final image editing, sometimes I do a fill light just to brighten up a little bit, because sometimes they do come out a little dark. That's typically what I get out of it.
George, can you go back 2 images? Right. When I look at no, one more, maybe go back one more. Yeah, right there. Like a dentist's observation was, it looks like there's not enough light to generate that image. But then I look at it and I say, well, if you would have taken that 4-second one and ignoring HDR, could you have done that same look in the HDR processed image if you just took one of those, like say the 4-second one?
I think that's very possible. I'm pretty sure I could. The only thing I would have to do is kind of layer it off, because I would try not to tamper with the sky. So I would use a picking tool effectively, grab this whole subject area there and apply a fill light to it, and then
Okay.
contrast, because fill light tends to flatten
Yeah.
images. So fill it, add contrast, a lot of contrast, and then I would have probably gone back to the sky and changed the white balance or added a little bit more color to it, like I did here.
Okay. Okay. This has been, for me, this has been very educational, because I rarely I would never think of doing that in a bracketed image. It just, my mind doesn't think that way. And so that's
Well,
why I asked that question.
when you're as simple as I am, these things just seem to come natural, I guess. I don't know. But it just, the problem with I know there's some wonderful, wonderful photographers out there who will shoot 5-10 minutes at a time, but then you get into the physics of the exposure itself, because it's a law of diminishing returns. The longer you expose, the less exposure you're getting. And there's a rule on that. I forgot what it was from my photo days, but after a while you start washing the image to the point where you're not going to get anything. So that's what bracketing makes it so, I think, so much better, because you combine them, you can get the effect in the sky, and still maintain the characteristics of your foreground subject. But I think that is the end of my lecture. Oh, let's see. Nope, those are just backups. We're back here at the beginning. So that's it. I've kept to the 1 hour time. I see it's 8 o'clock on the money.
Yeah, no.
Excellent.
Yeah, you told me 1 hour. So,
Okay, well, shall we open it up to questions and comments?
absolutely.
Okay, guys, the floor is now available. Go ahead.
This is Joan. I have another question. So A lot of times when I'm doing the long exposure, it is kind of hit or miss. How my water's going to look. Say I get it I get it too soft. If I'm bracketing like that, could I go back and just take a look at the brackets and see where I like the water at, and then just use that one or two image? I guess there wouldn't be any reason why not, right?
No, I think that's a great way to go about it, and I've done that myself because I'm not shy about having extra images. You know, you just have to spend the time in reviewing them. But you know, I've shot some brackets where half of them there's a feature in them or something, some noise that I just don't like. Oh, and I'll just pick a few of them to make my image. So I think that's a good way to go.
Great, because sometimes it's so time consuming to be standing there, especially when there's other people with you, trying hit or miss different times to get that water or the sky just right. So if I
I
bracket,
know.
if I
Yeah,
bracket, I could go back
Good.
and pick what I like and use that one or two images, 3 or 4, whatever, and get that water just where I wanted it.
Well, I think that's a good way to go. And I've noticed when I travel with friends and I'm shooting, being inconsiderate is the only way you can do it. It's like, you become persona non grata because what you thought would be a 3-minute shoot, all of a sudden you're 20 minutes.
Sometimes you have to take those friends home with you though and listen to
I
it when you're on,
know.
right?
I know. How about that? My wife has suffered in silence. She brings her quilting with her in the car.
Good idea.
Other questions? Okay.
George, a comment. This was a really good presentation. I enjoyed it. You've opened my eyes to the whole idea of doing HDR, and I'm going to tell you, I'm gonna practice that. I'm going to try that. I'm going to see how that comes out. Thank you.
Well, it's worked for me. And maybe and I wasn't taught that. I just kind of trial and error kind of got me there. And I was able to develop a technique that worked for me.
Mhm.
Whether it works for others, well, that's why we experiment.
Yeah,
It
it
makes
is very interesting.
Yeah, it makes me want to go out and try the long exposure again, like tomorrow.
Well, maybe next year we'll talk about impressionism and intentional camera movement.
Yes.
Because I do a lot of that with and using the bracketed images.
Yeah, very good. Very good. I used Photomatics for a number of years, and then I just kind of got out of. I think when I got a different computer and I didn't pay it or didn't install it, and just got away from using it. But I enjoyed it the years that I did use it. Thought it was a good program.
No, it's a very powerful program, and no, I recommend it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any questions or comments for George? Yeah, beautiful images, George. I'm very impressed. That looked very nice.
Well,
Hey,
thank you very much.
Dennis, I had just one more question, and George, thank you. I love the photos, and thank you for the commentary. Correct me. Uh, when you're bracketing, you're not bracketing beyond 2.5 minutes. I think. I mean, that's a question. You have a limit on the bracketing time, and
Pretty-
that was my question. You're
Pretty
not
much.
going after 5 minutes. You're not changing that endpoint.
Yeah, that is correct. My longest single exposure on a bracket is 30 seconds. So
Got
my sweet spot, if I was doing 5 exposures, I try and expose for 15 seconds. And then when I'm shooting 5 brackets, it becomes an 8, 10, 15, 20, and 30. Now, sometimes when I do 9 exposures, the way my camera manages it, and I haven't played with this setting at all. Sometimes I'll get a 4, 6, 8, 10, 15, and then 20, and then I'll get like 3 30-second exposures, which is okay if my sky is cooperating. So I've done those too.
Now, most cameras can only go 30 seconds max for an automatic exposure.
Yep.
But I understand the newer cameras now, like mirrorless Nikons, can go longer than that.
Yes, it can.
I think that's true. I have not, and I've got the new Nikon Z8, and I haven't pushed it further than that. Again, I'm gonna have to probably step out of that comfort zone.
Yeah, Joe, could you comment on that?
Yes, and I forget how many seconds it is, but it's into the minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
But there's one negative. It doesn't give you a countdown like some of the cameras do. And it'll say countdown, you're at 90 seconds, 89, 80, because you never know when it's over.
Are you
Okay.
sure, are you sure, Joe? This is Claire, because I was just doing one in a workshop and I did a 4 minute and it actually counted down on the top of the camera.
Oh, on the top of the camera, yes.
Yes.
Okay. But when,
Oh.
yeah, okay, I stand corrected. But on the back of the camera, which is where I'm typically standing, it doesn't do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And,
So-
and Joe, and George for that matter, the night photography, I mentioned Joe because we had the person from Boston on the Susquehanna River, Harrisburg. And I remember I thought I was doing like a minute and a half, George,
Mhm.
exposure on the river with the Harvey Taylor Bridge. And somewhere in there, I had to time it with a watch because he was,
Mm.
the lecture was suggesting, let that run longer because I'll get that nice visual on the river scene, the water scene, lighting if I let it run longer. And I have no idea what the exposure ISO is right now. But I mean, it was longer, and I remember him telling me to keep the exposure longer, but I wasn't bracketing, and I don't know, Joe, if you remember that at all. That person helping us at the time, he's really good, out of Boston.
Forget who that was. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember the situation, but I can't remember the guy's name right now.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, guys. Yeah, George, that was outstanding. Folks, would you unmute yourselves, please? And we'll give George a nice round of applause. There we go.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very
And-
much.
you,
Thank you, George.
Nice
Great
presentation.
job.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day. Enjoy this weather while we can.
Okay, thanks again, George.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
bet. All
Thank
right,
you.
bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
I know.
Okay, good night, guys.
Good night, Dennis.
And
Nate.
there was Claire on board, and she told me
Yes.
she wasn't going to make